This is why it's difficult to coach your own kids, and maybe how to navigate it and make it work. Remember this, a lot of times it's the kid's filter. So you can say something to them in the same tone that I do, the same exact phrase verbatim, and from me they receive it, they filter that as coaching, and from you they perceive that or see that as criticism. So it's not always, dad's fault. And I say dad because that's usually the ones who are having issues. Most coaches in America are male. But I do think sometimes it's true that as dads, we're harder on our sons than we are our daughters. And I see that right now a lot over the past 5, 6, 7 years that girls wrestling has exploded. Some of my wrestling dads, they're just like on cloud nine over their daughters wrestling, and then their sons is like, there's just less enthusiasm sometimes, and I'm like, girls wrestling's still a little bit new. Your son is probably 10 times better than your daughter, even though he's not winning state titles or maybe even placing right now. You got, so I do think that sometimes the maybe novelty or the newness, if that's a word, of girls wrestling is still at play. Obviously it is, it's still growing, but since most wrestling coaches are male and now their daughters are wrestling, it's just a different relationship, right? And I know women are harder on their daughters a lot of times than they are their sons, right? I know my wife was a little bit with my daughter. So I just think it's normal. It's God's way, right? Men are generally probably a little bit harder on their boys than girls. Women, the opposite. But either way, if you're having an issue with your child and you're trying to coach them, I coached my son, and it wasn't difficult, but there were some difficulties. My wife talked to him and said, hey, you know what? Your dad's your coach. When you're on a wrestling mat or at a wrestling tournament, he's not your dad, he's your coach. And it really was that way. I didn't see him as my son. Now there's a little bit of an emotional attachment because I want him to win because I know how bad he wanted it. And we're just a little bit more emotionally attached to our kids, hopefully, than you have 50 kids at a tournament. You're just doing your best to help everyone. But it's a little more stressful when it's your child, obviously. But so I would say a couple of things that will help. Number one, understand that the filter, it may not be your fault. Number two, knowing that you might want to adjust a little bit, or just have the conversation with them and say, this is kind of the way it is. I learned this from Nick and it makes perfect sense. 3, try to remove yourself, or do it. Remove yourself. So, we came to the conclusion, my son, because I made him cry Matt side a couple of times because I'm super emotional probably, right? And I was like, what the hell are you crying for? And he's thought I was mad at him. I'm like, no, I'm just freaking amped up out here. All right. Had about 4 cups of coffee this morning. I'm ready to go. But he was like, so we came to a conclusion. I want you there. I just don't want you to coach me or say anything. I go, okay. Because I was like, I'll sit in the bleachers. I don't care. So anyway, so I was there running, the little video camera we had back then before these phones got so fancy. And, a couple of wrestling dads. He really liked Todd Burke, who's an awesome dude, was a college football coach for a while. He liked him coaching him, a high energy guy, Matt side. Some of us don't like high energy coaches. Some of us do. But so that worked out good for my son. And then, he didn't know about wrestling what I did. And so I'm like, hey, tell him to push and slide from here. And so, Todd would go, push and slide, from your defense. If you have our online wrestling academy, you know how to push and slide from hip pressure defense. We don't want our belt buckle on top of the shoulder. We want to slide it down. So now I can push my opponent away when they're in on a leg and I sprawled on them. So pushing and sliding keeps them from lifting you. So push and slide, for example. Or Sean Gant, who went on to be kind of a big corporate executive guy. Guy's I call him the Black Mitt Romney, right? He's kind of like that kind of a businessman. Anyway, so Sean used to coach with us for a long time. But so that's kind of how I handled it with my son, and it worked out good. And I did let him know that, hey, you know, when you're on the mat, you're a part of my academy. You know, you're not my son. Secondly, I had to make a good effort as far as once he got into high school to remove myself, because sometimes I would coach mat side, you know, not a lot. I was not a moron, right? There's a few of you out there watching this. I was borderline once or twice, so I was like, screw this. My wife's like, you gotta shut the hell up. I was like, okay. So I took the iPad and I would just go way high where he couldn't hear me anyway. And then, you know, when I'm videotaping his matches, and I do this with my nephew now too, and I'm like, hey, you know, right there, you know, you grab the sock like this, you know, we want, this is a hook, this is a good hook. You know, we want using forearms. So when you hook that ankle, push and slide, whatever, I would talk into the camera and say, hey, you don't have a, you know, you don't have a proper hook. And when you push and slide, you have to arch till it hurts, right? Because we want to like arch like a cobra and push our opponent away. Okay, good. Now, instead of a cross face from there, you wanted to put thumb in the neck, push the head away first, and then circle left 3 times and hook the ankle. So I like get a little bit more mechanical when I'm videotaping my son back then, or now my nephew. So it was kind of good removing myself anyway. But I wasn't coaching that way from the stands. It was more just like, you know, amped up wrestling dad stuff, encouragement type stuff. But so understand that, you know, I had to be the 40-year-old. You have to be the 30, 35, 40, 45-year-old. You got to figure it out. And you got to remove yourself. Go high in the bleachers if you have to. And just remove yourself. You might remove yourself from practice. You know, I had a dad who's like, I just can't help myself. And I'm like, well, you better. Your kid's going to quit wrestling, you know? So removing yourself and being the 40-year-old is going to be key. You might not go to practice. You might just come back and watch the last 20 minutes of live once a month. People ask me, how did your dad coach you? I go, he didn't. How did your dad handle, you know, when he was mat side and he was watching you at practice? I go, my dad didn't go to practice. He was working. He on occasion went a first year or two when we were little kids, but he pretty much didn't go to practice. He just kind of stayed out of it. So, you know, no matter how big of a fan you are, maybe you have to remove yourself, you know? So there's some advice. Good luck. Appreciate you watching.